There are moments in sports history that transcend the game itself. Moments so extraordinary that they reshape how humanity views what's possible. But what happens when the greatest athlete the world has ever seen almost never made it past childhood? What happens when genius grows not from privilege, but from dirt floors and hunger? In 1950, a 9-year-old boy sat crying on the floor of a cramped house in Bauru, Brazil. His father, once a promising footballer himself, wept alongside him as they listened to the radio. Brazil had just lost the World Cup final on home soil, the Maracanazo, they would call it, the disaster at Maracanã Stadium. 200,000 people had watched Brazil collapse in front of them. The nation's shame was complete. The boy looked at his devastated father and made a promise that seemed impossibly naive given the circumstances. "I will win the World Cup for you, papai." His name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world would come to know him as Pele. But here's what makes the story different from every other rags to riches tale in sports. This wasn't about overcoming poverty through determination alone. This was about a kid so poor that he couldn't afford a football, so he made one from a sock stuffed with newspaper and called it his meia de trapos. This was about a boy who was told he'd never make it, who was literally too small and too young to matter. And yet, 8 years after that promise, he would do something that had never been done before and has never been done since. Tres Corazones, 3 Hearts. The small town in Minas Gerais state where Pelé was born in 1940 had a beautiful name for a place marked by crushing poverty. His father, João Ramos do Nascimento, known as Dondinho, had been a footballer too, a good one, a striker with real potential. But in 1947, during a match, Dondinho's knee gave out. No surgery, no rehabilitation. In poverty, an injury isn't temporary, it's permanent. The family moved to Bauru, an interior city in São Paulo state, searching for anything better than what they had. They found more of the same. Dondinho took odd jobs, his mother, Celeste, took in washing. The family lived in a house with gaps in the walls where wind whistled through at night. This is where most stories about Pelé begin to romanticize poverty. They talk about the beautiful game being born in the streets. But there's nothing beautiful about wondering where your next meal comes from. There's nothing poetic about wearing shoes so worn through that you're essentially barefoot. What poverty did give Pelé was something else entirely: necessity. He couldn't afford cleats, so he played barefoot. And this wasn't charming, it was brutal. Glass, rocks, thorns. Every surface became an enemy. But here's what happened. His feet became weapons. They developed calluses thick as leather. They learned to feel the ball with sensitivity that players in boots could never develop. They became precise instruments, capable of manipulating the ball in ways that seemed supernatural. He couldn't afford a real football, so he improvised. Socks stuffed with paper, grapefruits, anything roughly spherical. This forced him to adapt to unpredictable surfaces, irregular bounces, objects that didn't behave like proper balls. Years later, when he finally touched a regulation football, it must have felt like magic in comparison. But none of this guaranteed anything. Brazil's streets were filled with talented poor kids. Most would never escape. The nickname came first. Pele appeared during his childhood, possibly from mispronouncing Belé, a goalkeeper friend, or from other sources lost to time. Pele himself hated it at first. It meant nothing, it sounded silly. He wanted to be called Edson, his real name, given in honor of Thomas Edison. His parents wanted him to become an inventor, not a footballer. But Pele stuck, and eventually it would become the most recognized name in sports history. At 11 years old, Pele joined a youth club coached by Waldemar de Brito, a former Brazilian international who had played in the 1934 World Cup. De Brito watched this scrawny kid move with the ball and saw something that made his hands shake. He would later make a statement so bold that it sounded like madness. This boy will be the greatest footballer in the world. People laughed. The boy was tiny, he was poor, he came from nowhere. De Brito didn't care. He brought 15-year-old Pele to Santos FC, one of Brazil's premier clubs, in 1956. The club's directors were skeptical. They saw a skinny teenager who looked like a strong wind might knock him over. But De Brito insisted, and they agreed to a trial. Pele scored in his first practice match, and the next one, and the next one. 4 months later, on September 7, 1956, just before his 16th birthday, Pele made his professional debut for Santos. He scored a goal. It was the first of 643 goals he would score for the club, but nobody knew that yet. What they did know was that this kid was different. He wasn't just fast or skilled. He saw the game differently. He anticipated movements before they happened. He scored from impossible angles. He made defenders look foolish with feints and dribbles that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. In his first full season, 1957, Pele became the league's top scorer. He was 16 years old. The Brazilian national team had to notice. They had to. But here's where the story takes a turn that almost changed everything. The team's coaching staff was divided. Some thought Pele was too young, too inexperienced, too much of a risk for something as important as the World Cup. The 1958 World Cup was coming. Brazil had never won it. The ghost of 1950 still haunted the nation. This wasn't the time for experiments with teenagers. But one man believed. Vicente Feola, Brazil's coach, had watched Pele play and recognized what Waldemar de Brito had seen. Not just talent, not just skill, something transcendent. Feola selected 17-year-old Pele for Brazil's 1958 World Cup squad, the youngest player on the team, an unproven kid heading to Sweden to face the best footballers on earth. Most people thought it was a mistake. The Brazil squad that arrived in Sweden for the 1958 World Cup was talented, but anxious. The weight of 1950 pressed down on every player. The nation expected redemption, expected glory. The pressure was suffocating. Pele almost didn't play at all. In the first match against Austria, he sat on the bench. Brazil won 3-0 without him. In the second match against England, a 0-0 draw, he watched again. The coaching staff wanted to ease him in gradually, protect him from the pressure. But the team wasn't clicking. Something was missing. For the third group match against the Soviet Union, Feola made a decision. He put Pele in the starting lineup. Brazil won 2-0. Pele didn't score, but his presence changed everything. His movement created space. His unpredictability unsettled defenders. The team played with freedom it hadn't shown before. In the quarterfinal against Wales, Pele scored his first World Cup goal, the only goal of the match. Brazil advanced, but that goal, a simple finish by his standards, didn't capture what he was doing to opponents. He was making professional defenders look amateur. His control was mesmerizing. His acceleration was explosive. He played like gravity worked differently for him. Then came the semifinal against France, June 24th, 1958. This was when the world saw what Pele really was. France had the tournament's top scorer, Just Fontaine, who would finish with 13 goals. They had a legitimate shot at winning it all. They led Brazil 1-0. Things weren't going according to plan. Then Pele equalized, a thunderous shot that gave the goalkeeper no chance. 2 minutes later, he scored again. Brazil went ahead. But he wasn't finished. In the second half, he completed his hat trick. 3 goals in 1 World Cup semifinal at 17 years old. Brazil won 5-2. Pele had torn apart one of the tournament's best teams like they were amateurs. The football world was in shock. Who was this kid? Where had he come from? But if the semifinal announced Pele to the world, the final would cement him in immortality. June 29, 1958, Rosunda Stadium in Stockholm. Brazil versus Sweden, the host nation versus the team that had never won the World Cup. 50,000 fans packed the stadium, most of them cheering for Sweden. Brazil's players were nervous. Some were the same men who had experienced the trauma of 1950. They knew what failure felt like on the biggest stage. The weight of an entire nation's expectations was crushing. But Pele was 17. He didn't carry that weight. Not yet. He couldn't remember 1950 clearly enough for it to haunt him. All he carried was the promise he'd made to his crying father 8 years earlier. Sweden scored first. After 4 minutes, the home crowd erupted. It was happening again. Brazil was going to collapse on the biggest stage. But this Brazil team was different. They equalized through Vavá. Then Vavá scored again. Brazil led 2-1 at halftime. What happened in the second half entered the realm of legend. In the 55th minute, Pele received the ball with his back to goal. A defender pressured him closely. Most players would shield the ball, pass it back, play it safe. Pele chipped it over the defender's head, spun around him, and volleyed it into the net before it touched the ground. the stadium fell silent. Even Swedish fans couldn't believe what they just witnessed. The audacity, the technique, the sheer impossibility of it. A 17-year-old had just scored one of the most outrageous goals in World Cup history in the final. 10 minutes later, Pele scored again. A header this time. Brazil led 4-1. Pele had scored twice in a World Cup final, at 17. When the final whistle blew, Brazil had won 5-2. They were world champions for the first time. The curse of 1950 was broken. The Maracanã disaster was avenged. And Pele collapsed on the field in tears. His teammates lifted him on their shoulders. This skinny kid from Bauru, who 9 years ago couldn't afford a football, had just become the youngest player ever to score in a World Cup final. He'd scored 6 goals in the tournament. He'd shown the world something it had never seen before. But here's what most people don't understand about that moment. This wasn't the end of Pele's story. This was just the beginning. Returning to Brazil as a world champion at 17 sounds like a fairy tale. It was actually the beginning of something much more complicated. Pele was suddenly national property. Brazil's redemption made flesh. Every move he made was scrutinized. Every game was essential. Every failure was magnified. In 1959, he scored 127 goals. 127 goals in a single year. The number sounds made up. It's not. He was scoring in nearly every game, sometimes multiple times. Santos became an international phenomenon because of him. They toured the world. Whenever Santos played, stadiums sold out. Everyone wanted to see the Black Pearl. But something darker was happening too. In 1962, Brazil defended their World Cup in Chile. Pele played in the first match, scoring a goal. In the second match, he injured his groin and couldn't continue. Brazil won the tournament anyway, proving they were more than just Pele, but he watched from the sidelines as his teammates celebrated without him. Then came 1966, England. The World Cup Brazil entered as heavy favorites. Pele was now 25, at his absolute peak, unstoppable, unguardable. And teams decided the only way to stop him was to destroy him. In Brazil's first match against Bulgaria, defenders targeted Pele with brutal tackles. One scissor tackle left him limping. He played through it. In the second match against Hungary, the attacks continued. A defender named Joseph Bene kicked him repeatedly. No protection from referees. No yellow cards for assault disguised as defending. By the third match against Portugal, Pele was already injured. He played anyway because Brazil needed him. 24 minutes in, Portuguese defender João Moraes kicked Pele so hard that he had to leave the field. No substitutions were allowed back then. Brazil played with 10 men and lost 3-1. They were eliminated. Pele left that World Cup swearing he'd never play in another one. The brutality had broken something in him. The joy was gone. Football had become warfare, and he was the primary target. Why continue? This is where the story could have ended. A legend retiring at 25, bitter and broken. But that's not what happened. 4 years passed. Pele returned to the national team for the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. At 29, many thought he was past his prime. The brutal treatment from 1966 had changed them. He was more cautious, they said, more human. They were wrong. The 1970 Brazil team wasn't just about Pele. It featured Jairzinho, Tostão, Edson, Rivelino, Carlos Alberto. This was a team of artists, but Pele was the conductor. Brazil steamrolled through the tournament. They beat Czechoslovakia 4-1. Pele scored. They destroyed England 1-0 in what many consider the greatest save in history, Gordon Banks somehow stopping a Pele header that seemed destined for the goal. They demolished Romania 3-2, then Peru 4-2 in the quarterfinal. But the semi-final against Uruguay was different. Uruguay, the team that had broken Brazil's heart in 1950, still haunted the national psyche. This match was about more than advancement. It was about exorcism. Brazil won 3-1. Pele set up one goal with a brilliant pass that split Uruguay's defense. The Ghosts were finally quiet. The final on June 21, 1970, pitted Brazil against Italy. Both teams had won the World Cup twice. The winner would become the first 3-time champion. The stakes couldn't be higher. What happened that day in Mexico City's Azteca Stadium was perhaps the most beautiful football ever played. Pele scored Brazil's opening goal with a header. 18 minutes in, Brazil led. Italy equalized before halftime. The second half became a showcase of Brazilian brilliance. Edson scored from distance. Jairzinho made it 3-1. Then came the goal that defined everything. Brazil was already winning comfortably. The match was essentially over, but in the 86th minute, Pele received the ball in midfield and looked up. He saw Carlos Alberto making a run on the right wing. The pass Pele delivered was perfectly weighted. Carlos Alberto met it in full stride and hammered it into the net. The goal wasn't just beautiful, it was the culmination of everything Brazil had been building. Every pass had purpose, every movement had meaning. This wasn't just football, this was art. Brazil won 4-1. Pele lifted the Jules Rimet Trophy, the original World Cup, for the third time. No player before or since has won 3 World Cups. Brazil got to keep the trophy permanently, retiring it after their third victory. But here's what that 1970 World Cup represented. It was validation. After the brutality of 1966, after the doubts, after the injuries and the aging and the questions, Pele had proven something fundamental. He wasn't just great because he was young and explosive. He was great because he understood football at a level that transcended physical gifts. The 1970 World Cup was captured in color for the first time. The world saw Brazil's golden yellow jerseys in vivid detail. They saw Pele's joy, his creativity, his leadership. This tournament cemented Brazil as the beautiful game, and Pele as its greatest practitioner. When Pele retired from Santos in 1974, his club statistics seemed like typos. 643 goals in 659 matches for Santos, a goal-per-game ratio that defied logic at the highest level. For the Brazilian national team, he scored 77 goals in 92 matches. He played in 4 World Cups, winning 3. He remains the youngest player to score in a World Cup final and the youngest to win the tournament. But these numbers don't capture the full scope. Pele played in an era before social media, before global broadcasts were ubiquitous, before every match was recorded in high definition. Thousands of his goals exist only in memory and grainy footage. Researchers have documented over 1,000 career goals across all competitions, but the exact number remains debated. What isn't debated is his impact. Santos toured internationally because of Pele. In 1969, a civil war in Nigeria paused so both sides could watch Pele play. A 48-hour ceasefire was declared just so people could see him. A man playing football stopped a war. Governments wanted him. After 1958, European clubs offered fortunes to sign him. Inter Milan, Real Madrid, Manchester United all tried, but Brazil's government declared him a national treasure, legally preventing him from leaving the country. He was literally too valuable to let go. In 1975, Pele did something unexpected. He came out of retirement to join the New York Cosmos in the North American Soccer League. American football, soccer as they called it, was barely a footnote in U.S. sports culture. The NASL was struggling, attendance was abysmal. Then Pele arrived, and everything changed. His debut at Downing Stadium drew 22,000 fans. The Cosmos moved to Giant Stadium to accommodate crowds. Suddenly, soccer was fashionable in America. Celebrities attended matches, television coverage expanded, youth soccer enrollment exploded. Pele didn't just play in America, he transformed American soccer. When he retired for good in 1977 with a match featuring both the Cosmos and Santos, 77,000 people attended. The game itself saw Pele play one half for each team. In his final professional match, he scored for the Cosmos. The symbolism was perfect. Even in retirement, he scored. What happened after football reveals another dimension of Pele's story. He became a global ambassador, traveling to over 90 countries. He worked with UNICEF. He promoted literacy and education in Brazil. He received an honorary knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II. He was named Athlete of the Century by the International Olympic Committee. But his post-football life wasn't without stumbles. Business ventures failed, relationships became complicated, money was mismanaged. His personal life, like any public figures, had its share of controversy and mistakes. Yet, through it all, Pele remained synonymous with football excellence. When people argued about the greatest footballer ever, whether it was Maradona, Messi, or Ronaldo, Pele was always in the conversation, always the standard others were measured against. What makes this remarkable is that most of Pele's career occurred before modern football tactics, before sports science, before the global commercial machine that now surrounds the sport. He played in an era of brutal defending with minimal protection from referees. He played on muddy, uneven pitches that would be considered unplayable today. He played with equipment that was primitive compared to modern standards. And he dominated anyway. On December 29, 2022, Pelé died at the age of 82 after a battle with colon cancer. The world mourned. Brazil declared 3 days of national mourning. His coffin was placed in the center circle at Santos Stadium, where over 230,000 people came to pay respects. World leaders, sports stars, and ordinary people shared memories of what he meant to them. But here's what his death revealed. Pelé wasn't just a footballer anymore. He had become mythology. The stories told about him, some true, some exaggerated, some perhaps invented, had taken on lives of their own. The goal against Sweden in 1958, the near goal from midfield against Czechoslovakia in 1970 that barely missed, the countless moments of genius that existed somewhere between fact and legend. This is what happens to transcendent figures. They stop being merely people and become symbols. Pelé became the symbol of possibility, the proof that genius can emerge from anywhere, even from a dirt floor shack in Bauru where a boy made footballs from newspaper. His story resonated because it confirmed something fundamental that people want to believe, that talent will find a way, that greatness isn't determined by circumstance, that a poor black kid from Brazil's interior can become the most famous athlete on earth through pure ability. But that narrative, while inspiring, also simplifies. Pelé succeeded not just because he was talented. He succeeded because he had a father who taught him to play despite his own broken dreams. He succeeded because Waldemar de Brito saw something in a skinny 11-year-old and fought for him. He succeeded because Vicente Fiola had the courage to put a 17-year-old in a World Cup. He succeeded because teammates protected him, because coaches believed in him, because an entire nation lifted him up. Talent alone is never enough. Pelé was extraordinary, yes, but extraordinary talent meets opportunity far less often than we'd like to believe. So what made Pelé the greatest? Was it the goals, the trophies, the moments of impossible skill? Maybe it was something simpler. Maybe it was that he played with joy. Even after the brutality of 1966, even after the injuries and the pressure and the weight of being a living legend, Pelé played like a kid who just discovered what his feet could do. He played like football was supposed to be beautiful, not just effective. In an era of tactical sophistication, where football is analyzed to death, where every movement is quantified and optimized, Pelé's legacy is a reminder that the sport is ultimately about creativity, about expression, about finding freedom within the boundaries of the game. That 9-year-old boy who promised his father he'd win the World Cup didn't just keep that promise. He exceeded it in ways neither could have imagined. He didn't just win 1 World Cup, he won 3. He didn't just become good, he became immortal. The Black Pearl, the nickname that captured both his brilliance and his identity, started with nothing and created everything. And every kid who's ever kicked the ball made from newspaper, every player who's ever come from nothing and dreamed of everything, every person who's ever believed that circumstances don't define destiny, carries a piece of Pelé's story with them. That's the real legacy. Not just the goals or the glory, but the possibility, the proof that it can be done. From Bauru to Stockholm to Mexico City to Immortality. From a sock stuffed with paper to the most famous feat in sports history. From poverty to the word that transcends language. The name that needs no translation in any country on earth. Pelé, the greatest there ever was.